Peter Schiff. This is Saturday, July 4th, 2009. Well, happy Independence Day, everybody, although, to be honest, I don't feel very independent myself. You know, if our founding fathers actually realized the type of tax system that we would have in the United States today, they probably wouldn't have revolted. You know, after all, in retrospect, some taxes on tea or stamp taxes are very mild compared to the progressive income taxes we have today, the payroll taxes, the property taxes, the sales taxes, all the taxes that basically take better than 50% of our incomes for the government. And, I think that the colonists had it a lot better. And what's the trade-off? What did we get? We gained representation. Big deal. I don't think our representatives have done a good job. They now have our economy on the brink of the greatest financial crisis in modern history. I think that taxation with representation is every bit as tyrannical, or rather excess taxation with representation is just as tyrannical as taxation without representation. Anyway, getting back to the markets, Friday the Dow was down about 220 points. We're now within 80 points of that head and shoulders neckline I talked about in my last blog. If we close below there on Monday, it could spell a much bigger decline in the weeks and months ahead. The catalyst, supposedly, for the weakness was the jobs data, which disappointed everybody because we lost about 470,000 non-farm payroll jobs, which was about 150,000 more than they thought. And I don't know why people continue to be surprised by bad news. The economy is going to keep getting worse. Why would anybody hire anybody in this economy? They wouldn't. And in fact, the government bailouts and stimuluses are only interfering with the correction process that would ultimately lead to more hiring. If you look at the numbers, we gained jobs in education and healthcare. That's the only place we gain jobs. Unfortunately, that's not where we need jobs. We already spend too much money on education and healthcare. And not that they're not important, they are. But because of all the government involvement, they're inefficient. What we need is better healthcare and better education delivered more efficiently with fewer people. So the problem is the areas of the economy where we need to contract employment, they're growing. And the areas of the economy where we need more employment, they're shrinking. We lost about another 150,000 manufacturing jobs. We need more manufacturing jobs, not less manufacturing jobs. And so what's happening with the employment numbers is we can see that the situation is deteriorating even further as all the economic stimuluses, rather sedatives, are taking effect. And the dollar basically was relatively unchanged. And I think what's happening is the days of the dollar getting a big rally off of bad economic news have come to an end. And fundamentally, that never made sense. I think in late 2008, that was more an effect of the deleveraging that went along with the bad economic news. But pretty soon, bad economic news is going to have to be bad for the dollar. Rather than the dollar being flat on a day like Friday, it should be collapsing. Because the weak economy is bearish for the dollar. Because what happens is the weaker the economy is, the more likely it is that the Fed's going to keep interest rates at zero. The more the budget deficit is going to expand because the government's going to get less taxes. It's going to be spending more on programs and stimulus. So we have a bigger deficit to finance. And of course, if the economy stays weak, which it's going to, we're going to have another round of stimulus, a bigger stimulus, which is going to do even more damage. Remember, I've said that stimulus is like throwing gasoline on a fire. And if they keep throwing gasoline, we're going to have a raging fire on our hands. And all of this is very, very negative for the dollar, especially if you look at some of the comments that just came out on Friday from China and from India with respect to the dollar. First of all, you have India now calling for some type of alternative to the dollar as a reserve currency. And now, that's now in addition to Russia and China. So pretty much, most of the BRIC countries are on board with this. With this call. We just need Brazil to complete it. But also, look at the comments that came out of China, where there was a statement by a very high-ranking official. I forget what his title was. But basically what he said is since there's no alternative to the dollar in the short run, that countries that are issuing reserve currencies need to have some kind of external discipline placed on their ability to run deficits. Now, of course, they're mainly talking about the United States when they're talking about countries issuing reserve currencies, because as far as I know, the dollar is the only reserve currency, although certainly central banks hold as part of their reserves euros and Japanese yen. But the only currency that foreign central banks are aggressively having to prop up right now is the US dollar. The other currencies seems to be doing fine. So the comments, though they're disguised, are really aimed right at the United States. And what are they talking about? They're talking about some kind of discipline on America to prevent us from running budget deficits, to prevent us from debasing the value of their currency. In fact, one of the statements that was made by this official was that it might be your currency, but it's our problem. And they think it's their problem because they're the ones that are forced to prop it up. They're the ones that are forced to print a lot of their own money, to buy a bunch of dollars, to keep the dollar from collapsing. But that's the problem, or that's what they don't seem to understand, is it's not their problem. They don't have to do it. They can let the dollar sink. You know, when they say that there needs to be some type of discipline on the United States, it's China that can impose that discipline. All China has to do is stop buying our bonds, and they're going to force the discipline upon us, which is what I've been saying. But if the Chinese keep buying our bonds, if no matter how irresponsible we are, no matter how big the deficits are, if the Chinese are there to finance them, then how's there going to be any discipline? I mean, the reason there's no discipline is because our creditors like China are not supplying it. It's like, you have a drug pusher claiming that all the drug addicts have no discipline. Well, why don't they stop pushing drugs on them and maybe they'll have some? So it doesn't make any sense for the Chinese to say there ought to be some kind of discipline unless maybe they're actually thinking of providing it, because they can. And they don't need anybody else's permission. And they don't need to convene some kind of global tribunal to force the United States to rein in its deficits. I don't even know how they could do it. There is no body. The IMF can't do it. The World Bank, the UN. Nobody can tell American politicians to stop borrowing and spending. I mean, maybe we can as voters, but we don't seem to want to. Americans want government spending, or at least they think they want it, and politicians know that the way they get elected is to promise it. Nobody out there is talking about the fact that we have to allow the recession to run its course, that the recession is the cure for the disease that the government affected us with, and that if we don't accept the cure, even a painful cure, we're never going to get better. They're not telling the truth. So it's up to our creditors. It's up to countries like China. If China thinks that America needs discipline, and they're right, we do, who's going to apply that discipline? It's certainly not going to come from within. Now, the question is, they're talking about this right now. Are they that clueless? Do the Chinese not realize that they hold all the cards in this relationship? That it really isn't their problem? That it's very much our problem? We'll see. I don't know if they would be saying these types of statements if they weren't prepared to actually act if nothing happens. And if the economy weakens further, as I expect it to, if the unemployment rate keeps rising, the numbers we just got, the unemployment rate is 9.6%. But of course, if you count the people who are, who have given up looking for work because they're discouraged, or if you count the people who have accepted a part-time job or temporary part-time job just to help make ends meet while they're still looking for full-time employment actively, if you count those two categories, you get an unemployment rate above 16%. And it's going to keep rising. I think that unemployment rate could hit 20% by the end of the year and rise from there. And if we keep getting this economic data, and if we do get another stimulus package, will the Chinese be there to say no? Will the Chinese refuse to buy that debt and force Ben Bernanke to make a very, very important decision? Will Ben Bernanke then supply the discipline that our government needs and refuse to monetize that debt? Or will he live up to his nickname of Helicopter Ben and do exactly what he's now guaranteeing or trying to assure investors that he's not going to do and monetize that debt? Let's hope he doesn't do the latter, but unfortunately, my money is that that's exactly what he's going to do. Anyway, that's it for today, everybody. Enjoy your holiday weekend.